Hello and welcome to the Prism Pod. Today, I want to talk about demonstrations to defence, not as events, but as outcomes. To understand why demonstrations matter so much in defence, you first have to understand how defence learns. Defence is an institution shaped by accumulated disappointment, not cynicism, something more durable than that, memory. It carries the residue of programmes that sounded convincing on paper, of assurances that were technically accurate, but operationally hollow. Defence is an institution shaped by accumulated disappointment, not cynicism, something more durable than that, memory. It carries the residue of programmes that sounded convincing on paper, of assurances that were technically accurate, but operationally hollow, of capabilities that met the specification and failed the moment it met reality. Over time, that experience hardens into behaviour. This is why defence distrusts polish, not because it dislikes professionalism, but because it has learned that polish is cheap. Anyone with enough time, budget, and PowerPoint literacy can sound credible. Language scales easily, behaviour does not. Written assurance in defence is abundant. Specifications, compliance matrices, safety cases, claims documents. They are everywhere. What is rare is evidence of how an organisation behaves when these assurances are stressed. That is why defence places over-indexed importance on behaviour under pressure. It is not looking for brilliance. It is looking for coherence. It is asking, does the organisation stay internally aligned when something unexpected happens? Do people communicate clearly when the script breaks? Does decision-making collapse upwards, or does it distribute intelligently? These are not academic questions. They are survival instincts at an institutional level. Defence operates in a world where decisions are judged long after the context that produced them has vanished. Errors are replayed in hindsight, under scrutiny, by people who were not present and did not share the uncertainty of the moment. As a result, defence places extraordinary weight on predictability of behaviour. This is why demonstrations sit in a strange and powerful space. They are by no means operations, but they feel operational. They are not procurement milestones, but they influence procurement decisions. They are not controlled trials, but they are treated as evidence. A demo is one of the few moments where defence can observe an organisation without the full mediation of paperwork, where it can watch how a team plans, sequences, communicates, and adapts in real time. That is why demos carry disproportionate weight. A single day can compress months of judgment into a few hours, not because defence is reckless, but because it has learned to read signals quickly, order or disorder, calm or defensiveness, clarity or confusion, and ownership or deflection. These signals are not analysed consciously. They are absorbed by the audience present, and they linger. There is another reason defence behaves this way, and it is rarely acknowledged. Defence does not get to fail privately. In most industries, failure is amortised. A misdelivery becomes a complaint. A flawed product becomes a warranty claim. A programme that underperforms quietly disappears into a portfolio review. In defence, failure is permanent. It is written into reports, lessons learned papers, Lex committee hearings, and institutional memory. Decisions follow people for decades. The system does not forget, even when individuals move on. So defence does not ask, does this work? It asks, what happens when this all goes wrong? And who owns it when it does? That question is rarely voiced directly. It is tested indirectly through the behaviour that it witnesses, which is why defence watches how organisations handle uncertainty in real time. Whether limits are acknowledged, whether trade-offs are explained, whether confidence is earned or performed. A demonstration compresses all of that into a single observable moment. It is one of the few times defence can see how an organisation behaves without distance, delegation, or delayed accountability. How it reacts when time pressure is real and the audience is present. That is why demos feel heavier than they should. And that weight is not about the kit. It is about whether the organisation looks like something defence could rely on when there is no opportunity to explain later. That is the psychological backdrop for everything else that follows in this episode, which is why we need to start further upstream. Before anyone arrives on the range, before a single briefing slide is opened, before the kit is unpacked, the outcome of a defence demonstration is already largely decided. And it is not decided by the people who stand in front of the customer. It is decided quietly, upstream, by people who may never attend the demo at all. A few days before a capability demonstration, I found myself repeatedly chasing updates from a supplier's export team. The shipment required for the event was meant to have arrived days earlier. Each update sounded reassuring. Each one implied progress. None of them reflected reality. The kit arrived the day before the demonstration. Recovering the situation meant an 8-hour round trip, last-minute replanning, and the quiet acceptance that the margin for error had disappeared. The demo ran, just about, but the cost was invisible to everyone except for those carrying the risk. This kind of situation is so common in defence, it barely registers. And that is precisely the problem. It does not happen because people are careless or incompetent. It happens because urgency is unevenly distributed across organisations, and most systems are designed to dampen consequences as you move away from the point of delivery. To the backroom team, this was a shipment progressing through a process. To the people facing the customer, it was credibility, reputation, and future opportunity compressed into a single moment. That gap between task and consequence is where alignment degrades. Most organisations talk about ownership, but what they actually design for is installation. Process absorbs risk. Hierarchy dilutes responsibility. KPIs reward local optimization rather than end-state success. By the time an issue reaches the back room, it has been translated into abstraction. A delay, a dependency, a process exception. The emotional weight, the reputational exposure, the human consequence has been stripped out. What remains is solvable, but no longer urgent. That is why escalation emails feel oddly calm even when the situation is anything but. The language of process neutralizes urgency. It converts lived consequence into administrative inconvenience. Defense is unforgiving of all this dynamic. Not because things go wrong. Things always go wrong. Defense judges organizations on how they behave when they do. Those standing in front of the customers feel failure personally. Their name is attached to the outcome. Their credibility is on the line. They carry the awkward conversations, the raised eyebrows, the quiet reassessment that happens when something slips. Those behind the line experience failure as data, a late delivery, a revised timeline, a lesson learned. The distance is not moral, it is structural, and distance erodes ownership. The military understands this deeply. Soldiers are briefed on intent 2 levels above their immediate task because initiative depends on context. When conditions change, people need to understand not just what they are doing, but why it matters. Without that, they cannot adapt intelligently to what is in front of them. They can only comply. Industry rarely applies this discipline with the same vigour. Staff are told what to do, but not what sits downstream of their decisions. Purpose is assumed to propagate naturally through charts, decks, and strategy statements. It does not. Purpose decays unless it is actively carried. In defence-facing organisations, this decay is especially damaging because the end user is distant and abstract. The operator becomes a concept rather than a presence. When that happens, quality shifts quietly from contribution onto compliance. This really came to life when I once brought an operator from a specialist unit into a manufacturing facility to speak directly to an assembly line. He didn't give a motivational talk. He simply showed them the component they built, explained where it sat in the system, and described what happened when it worked and when it failed, and the devastating consequences that could happen if the latter occurred. Most of the people in that room had never seen the component in use. They'd never heard what failure looked like or the results of that failure. From then on, the atmosphere changed. Nothing in the process changed. Nothing in the specification changed. But the standard did. Checks became more deliberate. Small issues were raised earlier. Pride replaced indifference. Not because anyone was inspired, but because consequence had been made visible. That is alignment. Not culture, not motivation, a transfer of consequence. When people understand how their decisions land in the real world, behaviour adjusts without instruction. Oversight becomes lighter. Control becomes less necessary. When that link is missing, even capable teams drift. Trials slip. Deliveries degrade. Bids lose sharpness. Not through malice or incompetence, but through distance. This is where many organisations get alignment wrong. They reach for slogans, value statements, town halls. They talk about mission without connecting it to the mechanics. They assume belief can be declared rather than engineered. Defence sees through this instantly. Because defence does not trust language, it trusts behaviour. Behaviour is shaped by what people feel accountable for, not what they are told to care about. Real alignment is built through exposure to users, contact with operational reality, and honest discussions of consequence. It is reinforced through feedback loops, not broadcasts. Organisations that do this well design for it deliberately. They bring operators into the business to inform, not inspire. They share after-action reports internally as learning tools, not marketing assets. They talk openly about what broke and what changed. They change their internal language too. Production runs become readiness cycles. Delivery dates become capability milestones. Vocabulary carries consequence, and consequence sharpens judgment. The effects are tangible. Problems are preempted rather than escalated. Quality shifts from compliance to contribution. Deadlines become commitment because people understand what happens when they are missed. For defence-facing companies, this is not cultural work. It is operational capability at its fundamental level, which is why, by the time you reach the range, the demo is no longer a test of preparation. It is a revelation of what has come before it. So what makes a good demo? By the time you arrive on the range, alignment is no longer something you can create. It is something you are going to reveal. A defence demonstration does not generate confidence. It exposes where the confidence already exists. It shows how an organisation plans, decides, communicates, and absorbs pressure when there is no time to retreat into process. That is why demos feel intense even when everyone is technically prepared. They strip away insulation. They surface assumptions. They force choices to be made in public. There is a moment at the end of every defence demonstration that matters more than any firing sequence or performance metric. It happens quietly, and it is when a senior observer turns to someone else and explains, in their own words, what they've just seen. That explanation is the demonstration. Everything else is scaffolding around it. Because what defence carries forward is not data. It is their own narrative through what they've seen and heard on the day. What was it trying to do? Did it make sense? Did the people involved appear to understand the problem as well as the solution? I once watched a demo unravel, not because the kit failed, but because the wrong person answered a question at the wrong point. The answer was technically correct, but defensive and context-free, lacking understanding of what was actually being asked. The room went quiet off the back of it. Questions stopped, the demo continued, but the judgment had already been made. That's how tight the margins are on a demonstration. That moment mattered more than everything that followed. A demo can hit every performance metric and still fail. This usually happens when the organisation demonstrates capability but fails to demonstrate judgment. Judgment is revealed in small moments. Who speaks when something unexpected happens? Whether uncertainty is acknowledged early or allowed to linger. Whether ownership is clear or diffused. Defence notices this instinctively, because defence audiences are trained through repetition to read behaviour under pressure. They are not looking for perfection. They're looking for coherence. Good demos feel different. Calm without being casual. Structured without rigidity. Confidence without theatrical performance. The day has a shape, even when things deviate. That shape is built in advance. A good demo is a campaign in miniature. It has intent, sequencing, rehearsal, and clear decision authority. Not to control outcomes, but to ensure intelligent behaviour when outcomes deviate. The preparation must start with purpose. What judgment should the customer be able to make by the end of the day? That answer governs everything else and is your North Star of what you're trying to achieve. Context should come before capability. If capability comes first, it is evaluated as a claim. When context comes first, capability is evaluated as the answer. Hands-on engagement by the defence audience should come early. Once defence has something physical to anchor to, questions become operational rather than abstract. Who leads these moments matter. Engineers and specialists carry credibility because they understand failure modes. Sales supports, but does not dominate. Another thing to consider is that multi-vendor demos expose alignment failures instantly. Each organisation arrives with its own incentives, and you need to make sure that they are aligned and coherent before the day starts. Defence hears future integration risk when intent is fragmented. This is why planning conferences prior to the event matter. They force uncomfortable conversations early while misalignment is still correctable. The next point to consider is timing and preparation. You have to arrive early. Arriving a day early is not about setup, it is about behaviour. Tone is set before the customer arrives, and give yourself time to make sure that you have everything in place so that you can step onto that range and know exactly what's coming. Defence notices who looks surprised, who looks calm, and who looks in control. Also, make sure you capture the day properly, not for promotion, but for continuity. Photographs, interviews, and a concise post-event report stabilise the narrative to all parties. Book the next step before people leave. Momentum that is scheduled survives. Momentum that relies on enthusiasm does not. Debrief while insight is still sharp. Turn the demo into learning, not theatre, at the end of it. And bring the backroom with you where possible. Let the people who normally operate at distance see the end state. It reconnects effort to effect and strengthens alignment for the next cycle. When the backroom is aligned, the demo feels different, quieter, more assured, not because nothing goes wrong, but because the organisation absorbs pressure cleanly. That is what builds trust. Demonstrations do not create trust. They reveal whether it exists. By the time a team steps onto the range, defence has already been watching. The demo simply concentrates all of that observation into a moment where behaviour can no longer hide. Get the backroom right, and demonstrations stop being events to survive. They become natural expressions of how the organisation already operates, which brings us back to where we began. A good demo is not theatre. It is a rehearsal for trust. And in defence, trust is the currency that moves everything else.